The team of NPP, what people say is, do they have the correct team for that? Do they have the correct understanding of these foreign things or the foreign policies or the international arena? Do you have?
Yes, we do, and I think I would ask those people to look at the experience of the past.
What is our current foreign policy? Do we have such?
So that's something we really need to change because the foreign policy needs to be stable. Foreign service to focus on trade, investment, education and tourism, because these are sectors that we want to really strengthen.
Why a foreign policy is needed? What is our foreign policy? How can we position Sri Lanka with a solid foreign policy the world over? We are ready to talk about the future of foreign policy here in Sri Lanka. Welcome, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya.
Thank you.
Doctor, first let us assess what is our current foreign policy? Do we have such?
We don't seem to have a coherent foreign policy, one that is stable or one that takes into account our sort of strategic interests. Rather, every minister who comes in changes it accordingly. I mean, I do think the foreign ministry officials try to come up with something, but that is not how things happen, as you know. Ministers tend to take unilateral decisions. Government tends to take unilateral decisions, not based on any kind of coherent policy. So that's something we really need to change because the foreign policy needs to be stable.
Not to change, but to establish one.
To establish one that really takes into account why we need a foreign policy, what we expect out of our foreign service, how we need to choose our kind of strategic interests and deal accordingly with different countries and global institutions in specific ways.
Has the think tanks of NPP given a thought about finding a correct foreign policy?
No, we have. We have drafted a foreign policy. A summary of it will be released with our main manifesto on the 26th. What we want to refocus our foreign policy with regard to attracting trade. Currently, our foreign policy doesn't have a real focus. We think that the main aim of a foreign policy needs to be about the returns it can bring back to the people of this country. So then it needs to be aligned with our political positions as well as, very importantly, the economic policy. So we want to reorient our foreign service to focus on trade, investment, education and tourism, because these are sectors that we want to really strengthen and engage with different countries. So our foreign policy is designed based on reorienting the service to strategically focus on these different areas.
As per you, what is your take about the national interest? What can the national interest and how it can shape up the foreign policy going forward?
So again, you can't take the foreign policy in isolation. Foreign policy is aligned to the country's overall development strategy and overall sort of policy directions, and the foreign policy needs to align with that and support those interests. So our the foreign policy in particular will need to look at how we want to locate Sri Lanka globally. So in terms of the economy, in terms of regional and global security, there are lots of global issues that are taking place currently with climate change, with the changes in the market, with sort of regional issues that may have an impact on Sri Lanka. So we need to be able to engage with our foreign countries in order to ensure that Sri Lanka's interests are protected. So taking all of these into consideration, we need to build relations with countries that support us, seek out countries that we can engage more fruitfully with, and see how we can manage Sri Lanka's global position in a way that is aligned to the national interest and ultimately serves the people of this country.
Right. If you go into the nitty-gritties of the foreign policy, Doctor, now, if you take the China's influence, what is your take on that?
It's like this.
Are we like heavily dependent on them, or are we like, what sort of reliance going
So
forward?
China is one of our main lenders.
Right.
And that happened post the war. China became one of our main lenders. It's not the only one. There are other bilateral lenders also. Our policy is this. It's not. It's to look at how we can maintain good relations with as many nations as possible without unduly depending on any one nation. That's always not in the interest of the country to be overly dependent on any one country.
But how you like, have the mark on that? Overly dependent, or like,
in the sense that if there needs to be a balanced approach to dealing with all countries, but you have to take into consideration that today's world is a little complicated.
Correct.
It's not like during the Cold War, where there were two very distinct camps and you either aligned with one or the other, or you tried to maintain a non-aligned position. Today it's a multipolar world. There are many emerging global leaders. So you can't only think of the USA and Russia. You need to think about China, you need to think about India, you need to think about...
I want to know about the Indian relations as well.
And you need to think about emerging other organizations like BRICS, all of these that we need to engage with. Right? So fundamentally for our foreign policy, a crucial partner is going to be our regional alliances. And in that, you can't ignore India. Right? India is a big presence in our region. We need to be sensitive to the fact that India is very watchful over how our decisions can impact India's security, and we need to be sensitive to that. We can't just sort of bulldoze our way through these alliances. So we need to be careful that we don't unduly upset our regional partnerships and our regional alliances. Then China is an emerging partner for us as well, right? It's an emerging trade partner. There's a lot that we can learn from how China has developed in the last several years through a very sort of strategic development plan with very set targets, right? So there's a lot to learn from China as well, and we welcome China's partnership with us. But we also want to ensure that whatever investments that are made, whatever engagements we have, ultimately benefit the people of this country and don't go into the pockets of politicians.
Correct.
Right? And that the investments lead to proper returns. And many of the projects for which we obtain loans, not just from China but from other countries also, have turned out to be non-performing loans. This is one of the major reasons why we are in the state of economic bankruptcy that we are in today, right? So whatever investments, agreements we make with any country need to be based on scientific evidence about the returns that will accrue to the people of this country, and it can't be sort of vanity projects that are about sort of positioning ourselves in ways that are not in line with reality.
Correct.
Right? And also that do not
nothing to do with the national interest.
Nothing to do with national interest. It's you do with very personal, private interests, and that lead to huge amounts of corruption.
Now, when you talked a lot about the promoting investment opportunities and giving the opportunities for the foreign investors to come to Sri Lanka, but these investments sometimes come with some vested interest in them. How would you entertain such situations?
So that's where our negotiating skills are extremely necessary.
Do you have the correct team for that?
We have the correct team, but we need that skill within the officials of the foreign ministry also. So that's one thing that we are going to pay a lot of attention to, is actually developing the capacity of the foreign service.
That's one of the things that I want to ask as well, Doctor. Now, when it comes to the team of NPP, what people say is, do they have the correct team for that? Do they have the correct understanding of these foreign things or the foreign policies or the international arena? Do you have?
Yes, we do, and I think I would ask those people to look at the experience of the past. And I mean, you have to compare, no?
Correct.
Right? So, who are the people with experience and foreign acumen that have led the country in the past? I mean, if they did that, well, would we be in the position we are today? Would we be sort of at the mercy of so many nations, right? Or we are now being held up as like how not to run a country, this is how we are discussed in the international arena, right? How to avoid what happened to Sri Lanka, and then we are used as a case study. Right? I mean, this is a disaster. So one of the main things that we need to do is rebuild our image. Our passport has no value, you know that. When we try to get a visa, what hurdles people have to face? That's because we are not respected internationally. So to gain that so the so-called people with experience and good international relations have brought our country to this, where we have become the laughing stock of the international community, right? So we think we certainly want to change that, and we have the capacity to change that. But importantly, it's not just the politicians' role; it's the role of the officials. We want to strengthen our foreign service to make that a really professional, the diplomatic service to be really skilled and independent and able to guide the politician also as to how to deal with these things.
So you mean to say you have a plan of restructuring the foreign missions?
Yes. We currently we have something like, if I am not wrong, about 55 missions. So we want to restructure and reorganize those. We want to be able to have the missions in countries that are there are countries that are politically sensitive and politically important. There are countries that are important in terms of our economic policy, and there are countries that we have both engagements with. And we need to make sure that we assign our best people and our best resources to those countries.
So you think that we have the correct career diplomats for those?
We have some career diplomats. We will need to make sure we engage more, right? We need to have put a system in place for training, because what I've learned is that also and that's not necessarily the fault of the foreign officials, it's actually the responsibility of the political leadership, that when we go for negotiations, often we are in a weak position because the country's agenda is not clear. Our own agenda is not clear. So we go without an agenda, without necessarily knowing what we want and what limits we have in terms of negotiation. And often what happens is the other country's will is imposed on us, right? That may not always be. You asked about how investments can sometimes be not in the best interest of the country. Even FDIs, right? But
the foreign trade agreements.
Yeah, right? So for that, you have to go into that agreement with a clear idea about what we want for our country, what is best for our country, and negotiate on that. And negotiating that is also a skill, right? It's not, you can't just turn up into a room and expect things to go the way you want, right? You have to be very prepared. Even now, when we meet with foreign diplomats, they come into the room, they know everything about us. They've done their homework, they've been prepared, they have their staff with them who advise them on what they need to do. I don't think we have that amount of preparation currently now when we go into, when our ministers go into these discussions and agreements, right, where they go in for these negotiations. I don't think we do that kind of preparation. So we need to really strengthen that part of the foreign service as well.
Most of the Sri Lankan expats, when you talk to them, what they say is our foreign missions are not in a situation to do so. The required job of delivering what is needed by the country. So you have a plan. We have a plan. Of especially like giving them the target of this is what is required of them?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, part of the problem is because the foreign service has been politicized to a large extent, and it's become like a reward system for friends and family and cronies, right? Or retirement benefits and this, that and the other, and you're posted to really strategic positions completely on political whim and fancy, right? That cannot happen. That cannot happen under any circumstances. And enjoying all the perks. And sometimes when you go to these foreign missions, their main target seems to be sort of, doing the protocol for visiting Sri Lankan ministers and MPs and their families. Right? That can't be that. Protocol part of the mission's responsibilities has to be not the
Only-
priority,
correct.
right? Also, there's another thing that I forgot to mention is also generating employment, right? Now, we have a lot of workers who go abroad, right? They need to be protected. They need to have services. We also need to talk to those countries and generate the kind of employment for which we can supply the necessary human resource, not at the bottom level as we are currently, but really raise the standard of the foreign employment opportunities that are available to us. Those have to be the objectives of the missions.
The plans, what you mentioned, look very rosy, but the problem is the reality of implementing them. What is the plan for that?
Political will is what we have, I think, in abundance, right? And that is what has been lacking up to now. And also we think that within our public sector and in the foreign service, like in the other service, there are really good, talented people who've been held back because of this really corrupt, nepotistic political culture, right? But when you allow them, when you give them the correct environment to work, when you set them targets, when they know that there's a plan, that there's a focused plan about what we expect, there are plenty of people within our public sector who will step up and who can deliver. They've been crushed. They've not been allowed to work. That's the biggest problem. So we see as one of our primary responsibilities really building these structures and institutions and systems. Because once you have the systems and institutions in place, there are people who can deliver.
What will happen to the ones who are already appointed then?
Well, they will have to fall in line or face the consequences.
Example, will they be called back?
Yes, if they don't deliver, they will be called back. Certainly, some of the political appointments we will definitely recall.
Right. Okay. Other main part about this foreign policy is the military ties. Now, we know that Sri Lanka being located so strategically. Now, even in the recent past, there are a lot of military exercises taking place in our seas and in the nearby areas. What would be the plan for that as well? Again,
the bottom line is what is in the best interest of this country and the people of this country.
But the concern is, Doctor, now when you have competing countries having their own military exercises, either one party or other party is getting upset over it.
Yeah, that will happen because there are already agreements that that this country has reached with certain countries which are delicate, if I may put it, in terms of how it affects regional security, regional partners. In our view, the best strategy is for us not to be in a position where we are seen to be a threat to anyone else, right? And to do that, we need to maintain balanced relationships with as many countries as possible and not seem to be veering one way or the other. Okay? Now, over the past several decades, that's what you really saw, right? With every change of government, the sort of international ally also changes. For one government, it's India. For another government, it's China. For another government, it's the US. Right? So this can't keep shifting. We need to have a balance between all these superpowers because we have to understand our position. We are currently at a relatively weak place in terms of our negotiating power also, right? But we are also in a very strategic location.
How to gain that power? That's the concern.
We think it's also...
You can just mention the plans, but gaining...
No, but I think you asked about political will, but it's also about the transparency and lack of corruption in how you deal with these foreign partners, right? I mean,
being straightforward,
coming with your own agenda. I mean, when they know that the minister who they are dealing with is also on the side negotiating a commission, they are not going to take you very seriously.
Correct.
They know that. They know that's a leverage point for them. But they're not going to be able to do that with our government. Right? They're not going to be able to do that with our government. It will be very straightforward, very transparent, and based on an agenda that is in line with the national plan.
Before we wind up, I need to touch main two points, Doctor. One is about the debt diplomacy, because we all talk about restructuring our debt with foreign lenders and all. What can this influence our foreign policy?
Yeah, well,
Because we need to restructure.
we need to restructure, and that's where the IMF will have to come in. But then there are also other global partners who can assist us in terms of how we negotiate this. I mean, you know, there are 3 types of debt that we are currently having to restructure: the bilateral, the multilateral, and the international sovereign bonds. The international sovereign bonds are going to be the ones that are most tricky to deal with.
Yes, please.
Right? But again, we need to go with a plan. We can't allow the bondholders to dictate terms completely to us. Right? So we need advice, we need help on how to negotiate those to our best interest. Right? So that we have to, there are, I mean, we are not the only country who's negotiating on these things, who are restructuring these things, right? Even right now, there are many other countries who are negotiating with the private bondholders and getting much better deals than us, right? Getting much better deals than us. And these are, you know, not countries that are very different to us. So, so we need to learn from some of the others. These IMF programs and these restructuring programs are not unique. The IMF package is fairly standard, and there are other countries who've been through this experience. We need to learn from them how best to negotiate and talk to them and get their help also and get their advice and see how we can apply that to our context.
Final thing, now you talked about having concrete policies in place, but we see these policies change. As you say, the person who is getting appointed as the minister or the president, they just tend to change everything the way we want. But how can we have like a correct national policy? Now this is the policy for the next 10-15 years. No one can change it. What is the mechanism of having something?
You need to have a strong public sector for that. You need to have a strong public sector. You need to have in place measures so that the discretionary powers of the political authority, the ministers are not arbitrary. Right? So there needs to be some check and balance. So we have proposed, for instance, that each ministry should have a team of experts who actually guide the minister, so that the minister can't sort of turn up in one morning and decide this is what I'm going to do. Right? It has.
But practically, is it possible?
It is possible.
In Sri Lanka.
It is possible.
In Sri Lanka.
In Sri Lanka, it is possible because we have the capacity. What is wrong in our country? Why none of this has worked? Is the political culture. Right? It's the nepotistic, corruption-driven, patronage-based political culture that has prevented a lot of this from happening. Once you change the political culture, many of the other things will fall in place.
All this time, we Sri Lankans had only dreams. So you sure that our dreams will become
reality? You have
reality?
To have dreams, right? This is a country that can be changed. Right? You have to have faith in this country. You have to have faith in this country, and that faith lies not with anybody but with the people of this country. Ultimately, it's the people of this country who decide, and the people of this country who will work towards that. For too long, we've just expected the politicians to deliver. We have to change that. The politicians can't be the most important people in this country. The people, the citizens of this country have to take center stage, and that is happening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamari Amarasuriya, talking to us on the foreign policy going forward, making Sri Lanka yet again a proud nation in the world arena. Thank you very much.